Hello and welcome back to Conspiracy Cookout. Today's video is more of a commission than anything else, coming from my friend Steven. Steven is one of those healthy types that watches what he eats and exercises regularly, but every month he has a cheat day where he apparently tries to consume 8,000 calories before he makes himself sick. Because of this, and because he knows I bake and also has been known to eat entire loaves of my homemade bread in one sitting, he asked for me to make for him a homemade chocolate cake for his cheat day. I would have obliged in all circumstances, but I thought this was a good opportunity to put my steam oven to the test. Let's get to it. For this entire recipe, cake and frosting, you will need 3 cups of flour, 3 cups of sugar, 3 cups of cocoa powder, 8 cups of powdered sugar, 1.5 tablespoons of baking soda, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 tablespoon of salt, 3 large eggs, 1.5 cups of buttermilk powder, 3 cups of warm water, half a cup of vegetable oil, 2 tablespoons of vanilla extract, 1 pound or 4 sticks of butter, and 1 can of evaporated milk. The cake will be made in 3 9-inch rounds. If you're using an oven, you can bake all 3 of them at the same time to save time, but since I'm baking mine in a steam oven on a gas burner, I have to make each round one at a time. For each individual round, add 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of sugar, half a cup of cocoa powder, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 6 tablespoons of buttermilk powder into a mixing bowl and whisk to combine. In a separate bowl, combine 1 egg, 1 cup of warm water, 3 tablespoons of vegetable oil, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and mix until blended together. Do not combine the wet and dry ingredients until you're ready to bake. The reason for this is baking soda is a powdered base and buttermilk powder is a powdered acid. Anybody who has ever done kindergarten chemistry knows that mixing bases and acids, most famously baking soda and vinegar, results in a salt, water, and carbon dioxide gas. As powders, they don't really mix and react thoroughly, but the addition of water and a whisk to combine them results in a lot of CO2 bubbles which, in lieu of yeast as a leavening agent, will cause the cake to get nice and fluffy. Naturally, combining the wet and dry ingredients well before you're ready to bake will cause all the CO2 to bubble out of the batter before you bake it, resulting in brownies, not cake. So, before combining the wet and dry ingredients, prepare your cake pan. I'm using a 9-inch springform pan, otherwise known as a cheesecake pan, because I want rounds and do not have solid round cake pans. To this pan, I will wipe down the sides with ghee, or butter if you haven't already made ghee, and apply a dusting of flour to keep the cake from sticking. Once your pan is thoroughly prepped, whisk the wet ingredients into the dry ingredients, and stop when it's just combined. Whisking too much starts to form gluten chains in the flour, which will make your cake gummy. Also, the longer you stir, the more CO2 off-gases out of your batter. Pour the batter into your pan, and bake at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes, or until a toothpick inserted in the cake comes out clean. If using a steam oven, cover tightly with tinfoil and let it steam for about an hour. Alternatively, if you're using a springform pan anyway, clamp some parchment paper between the base and the rim for some extra base release. You can then wrap the whole cake pan in tinfoil to keep moisture from seeping in through the base, and put a nice knot of kitchen twine around the pan to help you insert and remove the cake from your steam oven. After having to stick my fingers between the oven and the cake to fish the first one out, I would highly recommend this. After steaming, you should be left with a nice cake round. Don't worry if it seems a little fudgy, steaming keeps it very moist and it will firm up as it cools and dries out. If you are me and have to steam each layer separately, repeat this process 2 more times. While we're waiting for our cake rounds to cool, I can work on making the frosting. For this, you will need 1 pound of softened butter, 1.5 cups of cocoa powder, 8 cups of powdered sugar, 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract, and half a teaspoon of salt. The first step of making the frosting is to thoroughly incorporate the cocoa powder into the butter. If you have electricity and a stand mixer, or even an electric hand mixer, this step will be a piece of cake. Without either of those, you're going to need a sturdy spoon and perhaps a double boiler. Start by working the butter until it's very soft. Temperature is the biggest factor in how soft the butter will be, so in my case, being in an uninsulated bunker in the wintertime, I chose to make a double boiler by setting my mixing bowl over a pot of boiling water for a few seconds. What this does is melt a bit of the bottom layer of butter, and then when I remove the bowl from the heat, I mix the melted butter into the solid butter. Only melt a little at a time. You still want the butter to be semi-solid for the frosting. Once it's nice and soft, start adding your cocoa powder. I'm shooting to add it a third at a time, incorporating each third completely before adding the next. Once the cocoa powder is all in, add the salt and vanilla extract. If the frosting seems too dry and powdery, add a splash of the canned milk to moisten it up. Only use a little at a time though. Too much and the frosting will get watery. Once the mixture is homogeneous, we can start adding the powdered sugar. For easy measurements, 1 standard bag of powdered sugar is exactly enough for this recipe. Add it to your frosting, a quarter at a time, in the same manner that you incorporated the cocoa powder. Once again, add a splash of milk if it gets too thick or too dry. After all the powdered sugar has been added, now it's time to adjust the consistency. You're looking for the frosting to be soft and spreadable, but not so soft as to run off the cake in a puddle. Add milk to soften the frosting, and extra powdered sugar to firm it up, 1 tablespoon of either at a time, until it's the consistency you want it, and once it's there, spoon it into a gallon-sized Ziploc for even distribution later. Alright, cake is done and cooled, frosting is done, now it's time to frost. If you have cake decorating tools, now is the time to break them out of the attic. Place a cake round on whatever surface you plan to frost the cake on, in my case it's a round piece of cardboard. Cut a corner off your Ziploc bag of frosting, and apply a spiral of frosting to your cake, working from the outside in. Add the second cake round, tamp it down so the second layer is level. Add another frosting spiral, and then the third round, finishing with another spiral on the top. Now that you have your layers assembled, apply a coil of frosting around your cake, working your way up the side. If your frosting is too loose, you're going to have trouble here because the frosting has to layer on itself. But once it's in place, all that's left to do is smooth the sides and the top, scraping off any excess into a bowl, until the cake looks good. From here you can decorate with a piping bag if you have it, or drizzle some homemade chocolate on it if you're as extra as I am, but that's ultimately unnecessary. To keep the frosting from sticking to your knife as you cut it, I'd recommend refrigerating the cake before cutting it, but that's a personal preference. And there it is, one scratch-made chocolate cake made without electricity, and in my opinion it's a pretty good one too. But don't take my word for it, ask Steven. It's his cake after all. Steven, how is it?
We're going to take a sample of Tony's homemade cake, a cake made without electricity. It was pretty good.
Amazing. Without rousing endorsement, we're going into the cost breakdown. It looks like it's going to come out to 43 cents of flour, 75 cents of sugar, $5.01 of cocoa powder, $2.15 of powdered sugar, 6 cents of baking soda, 2 cents of baking powder, less than a penny worth of salt, 29 cents worth of eggs, $3.95 of buttermilk powder, 20 cents of oil, 4 cents of vanilla, $1 for 1 can of evaporated milk, and $2.50 of butter, which brings our grand total to $16.40. I may be biased, but I think he got his money's worth. And with that, I'm signing off for the week. If you like this video and want to see more stuff like it, hit subscribe and let me know if you made this cake and how it went in the comments section. See you next time.
I like the texture of the actual cake. I'm not a huge frosting guy myself, but
It's very much like a muffin, right?
mm-hmm. And I definitely like that for sure. So if I were to rate this on a Steven scale, and a Steven, I don't really like frosting that much. In fact, for one of my birthdays, I do believe my 19th birthday, my mother baked me a cake with no frosting at all. I would rate this on a Steven scale of a solid 8.5 out of 10.
Very good. Very nice.
If it had less frosting, it'd probably be higher, but that's just a personal preference.